who've worked in the AI, and they worked at OpenAI. So I've been hearing about this for years. They showed me some of the first work. The funny thing that I think people don't realize is like some of the first stuff, in addition to image recognition that was mastered, was actually song recording, making AI generated songs. That's just now coming to the fore. And I think it's very telling that a lot of these bigger AI companies kind of didn't touch that because I think they were aware of the intellectual property issues. And now what you're seeing is a lot of the smaller companies who are a little bit more emboldened, unveiling their stuff. Anyway, I've been seeing this because I'm a science fiction writer, so it's kind of one of my jobs to think about the future. And I had friends that would show me this stuff, and at first I honestly wasn't that impressed. But then it got better, as technology always does. And what happened is GPT-3, before it was released as ChatGPT, was kind of released in Silicon Valley over the pandemic. And I went up to visit some friends, and they kind of showed it to me, and they wanted to test it on my ability as a writer. They wanted to see if it could mimic me, and it could mimic me. And that was actually kind of a wake up scary moment for me. It couldn't mimic me very well. It wouldn't do stuff that I would think I would do. But I was like, if you were trying to like duplicate my voice or my labor, you could probably get away with it for like short, fast, and dirty purposes. So I was like, all right, wow, that's fascinating. Honestly, I probably should have alerted the guild to that at that point because there's a lot of ramifications for us as creative writers. But then what happened is the Writers Guild was gearing up for its 2023 labor negotiations. And we knew this was going to be a big one because there's been a lot of economic changes to Hollywood thanks to streaming and the rise of companies like Amazon and Netflix and Apple in our industry. So we knew it was going to be a hard fight. And then ChatGPT debuted in November and it took off and everyone subscribed to it and everyone was talking about it. And at that moment, I realized, oh, I have a little bit of inside info and experience in the space. I emailed leadership in our guild. The great thing about the Writers Guild is it's not just a union, it's a guild. So it's a very horizontal structure. People can reach out to the board. And what happens in the guild is sometimes if you call out an issue, they put you on it. And so I said, do we have anyone working on AI? They said, we actually do have a working group. And would you like to be a part of it? And so I met with the working group. There had been other writers, not surprisingly, who think about the future in science fiction who'd been tracking this. And we all got together and we started playing with ChatGPT, with back then Bard, and with Claude, also the image generators. We started tracking what was going on in the space around artists and the use of their work and all this kind of stuff, the copyright things. And we knew this was a huge issue. So we basically were part of this working group. We put together a presentation for the board, and the board had a lot of stuff on its plate, a lot of like Hollywood specific issues. And we made the argument, no, we need to get guidelines and protections for us as laborers, as creative individuals now, because if we don't, we're going to miss our chance. 3 years from now, AI will have implanted itself in our work no matter what, and we'll be fighting a rearguard action. Fortunately, to their credit, the board listened to us. We went into our negotiations. We gave them our recommendations. They went through labor lawyers and their process, and then they had a discussion with our bosses, the studios. And not surprisingly, there were other issues that led to a strike. But the thing that was a little bit disheartening at first was that they wouldn't talk about AI at all. And it was a little bit of oh, it's too new. We don't know what to do with this, which felt a little bit disingenuous. We kicked the can. We're like, we're not going to kick the can. And we went on strike. And over the course of the strike, it was really hard. I will not lie. I'm speaking for myself, not for the guild as a whole. There's stuff I obviously can't talk about, but it was the hardest issue, AI, because there are promises in these space of replacing labor and all this kind of stuff that I think come from an uninformed and untechnical sense of what AI is and could do and should do. And the studios didn't want to give that up. It took us 153 days, and we finally got the bare minimum of protections we felt we needed. We realized there's a lot more to be done. We're going to need legislation, but we did it and we walked, and it was hard. And I don't think we could have done it without a guild or a union. And since then, Hollywood's been slow to come back because it's a rough economic environment in the creative industries in general. It always has been, even harder now. What I've seen day to day is the AI doesn't really replace the human because, again, our industry is a creative industry where it's really about personal expression. TV shows may seem factory made, but I promise you, even an episode of Law and Order represents the convergence of many different points of views of human beings to hash out a story and themes and characters that are relatable, that speak to our experience. And so it hasn't replaced us. It can be useful in some respects, It is very unuseful on others. There are still challenges. Obviously, OpenAI just unleashed Sora, which has kind of sent a wave of panic through the industry that pretty soon the entire creative process that we know, human beings, laborers, artists, designers, musicians, could be replaced in one fell swoop. I think there is real danger there. I think that's a misunderstanding of the creative process to a degree. And part of it is now us working with studios and agencies to try and like bring back to reality where and how AI should be used, where it is helpful without cutting the humans out of the loop. Another challenge I've seen, and this is something that I think is going to start popping up in the academic world, maybe we can talk about it in the Q&A, Edward, is we're getting people like you when we write a script, there are reviewers who review it, and that's how it makes its way up the channel as to what gets made and what doesn't get made. And people start using these AI chatbots to do coverage of scripts. And that is like the opposite of what you should be using AI for, which is replacing your human judgment. AI does not have human judgment. Ours is an industry, but human expression. So that's another thing that we're having to deal with. I have seen some benefits, and I do think there are possible ways for AI to be used helpfully. But in my experience, the biggest challenge is that I think our economic system is driven towards not prioritizing quality. Quantity over quality tends to be what fits in our models. And quality is not something that should go without a fight. And I think we need to have a huge human conversation about where that goes and why we are doing something. It's not like the how or the what of AI, but the why. And I think that's something that we creatives and people of the humanities can really bring to the table and should bring to the table, because I don't think Silicon Valley and industry really grapples with that question on a deep, meaningful level. And I think it's our job to make them grapple with it.
Great, thank you. That's an amazing way to kick us off. Enongo, please, your turn.
Yeah, thank you so much, John, and thank you so much, Katina and Edward, for organizing this really important conversation. So the way that I find myself in this conversation is through a few kind of intersections. The first is, as mentioned, I'm a hip hop artist. I've been performing under the name Sammus for since about 2009, 2010. And so obviously I have a vested interest in the future of music in that regard. I also got my PhD in science and technology studies from Cornell University, and I graduated in 2019. And for those who are unfamiliar with the field, this field is committed to asking questions about how sort of social, cultural values and norms are shaped by and shape the tools, technologies, and knowledge that kind of we think about as governing our quote unquote modern world. And so often that's scientific systems, that's technological systems. And so it's really been actually an incredible moment for STS scholars, because I think a lot of the recognition of what big tech is shaped by, the sort of values, popular culture is engaging with those ideas now in a way that I think a lot of STS scholars for years were sort of thinking through. And so having this sort of dual relationship to the future of music, both through the STS perspective and through the, my position as a hip hop artist, have led me to this discourse. But the most sort of specific part of that is that through my work as an artist, I have been working with a video game company called Glow Up Games. It's a small women of color led studio to try to develop a rap mechanic, like a rap rhyming mechanic for a game. And so one of the first tasks that I was given when sort of working with the studio to try to develop this rap tool is to see what already existed in the realm of rap synthesis in terms of technology. So I kind of set about doing this research. I started working with the company in 2019, and things really got going once we were able to get some funding around 2020, 2021. So just as I was diving into the research, I think some of these tools were coming to the fore. So I'd love to just share my screen briefly, because I think playing some of the sounds is helpful for having folks recognize the stakes of the conversation, because it's really disorienting when you're sort of interfacing with the way that I think these tools are able to take on the persona of particular artists or voices that we recognize. So one of the sort of big innovations has been sort of these text-based generative AI tools. In the realm of hip hop specifically, this, you know, a lot of these tools are not hip hop specific, but I'm really invested in what's happening in the rap space, because I think the foundation of the music industry emerging from minstrelsy and performances of blackface in the 1820s, that, you know, in that moment, has shaped our relationship to musical and performance practices in the contemporary moment. So I think hip hop is an important lens through which to think about what might happen with the rest of the music industry. Whatever's happening in the hip hop space, I think, can in many ways be extended to think about what might happen in other parts of the industry. So when I think about text-based generative AI tools, there are some specific songwriting tools, but even something like ChatGPT, if you type in like, write me a rhyme like Jay-Z, a kind of awful rhyme will come back to you that's not really in and what I would describe as the style of an artist like Jay-Z. Like, these are very basic rhymes. It's not really doing anything metrically complex, or there's not really higher order storytelling or use of, you know, similes and metaphors, but it does give you a verse that sort of summarizes what Jay-Z is interested in as an artist. And so for, you know, higher profile artists, but even for myself, I've been able to do this sort of exercise of like, write me a verse in the style of Sammus. And like John says, it's disorienting to see the system reflect a version of you back at yourself. That's maybe not great, but it's still a version of you. And there's something really disorienting about that. There's also text to audio synthesis tools that have become more refined over the past few years. So I say text to audio because there's text to speech, and then text to music is a sort of more emergent form of what's going on. So with text to speech synthesis, this was one of the first examples that I heard of that really alerted me to the possibilities of what might happen. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with like audio deep fakes. So this is an example that I first heard that went really viral in 2021 of quote unquote Kanye West performing Bohemian Rhapsody through the tool uberduck.ai. And this circulated quite a bit. Oh, let me make sure that I'm sharing sound as well, sorry. Okay, share sound.
Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy? Caught on the landside, no escape, I'm real it up in your eyes. Look up to the skies and see, I'm just a poor boy, need no sympathy. I'm easy come, easy go. Little love.
So disturbing for many different reasons. But this was the first thing that I sort of heard where I felt ill in my stomach when I was kind of trying to process what these developments might mean. In terms of text to music synthesis, there are a number of different tools that are currently being developed by companies like Google. Google has Music LM, OpenAI has Jukebox. I think Facebook is working on this large language model, or this large sort of this system that allows you to type in a prompt and produce a musical output. So in this example, I typed in a rapper rhyming over an ambient jazzy sounding beat, and I'll just play you an example. And you can hear this weird sort of like shadow rapper, like there's not words that are being expressed, but there's this sort of like shadow of a, you'll hear what I'm talking about. It's really strange. So you hear there's sort of like words, but it's not forming as coherent thoughts. And so it's not clear what the data set is that was being pulled to create this song or this sound bite. But clearly that had words or rap verse over it, whatever they've been using, and it kind of amalgamates. One interesting observation is that when you type in a woman rapper rhyming over an ambient jazzy sounding beat, it says can't generate audio for that. So there's a gendered kind of dimension to these tools. And then the last example I want to give, which is the most recent, is AI trained vocal filters, which are tools that enable users to run their vocal takes of a song through the filter of an artist's voice, which has been modeled using their speech and performance data. So it's able to capture the fluency and nuances of sung and rapped speech that these other tools are not able to capture, because a real person can perform, but put the filter of a different person's voice over their voice so that it is still capturing those sort of performance nuances. So a song was recently released in 2023 called Heart on My Sleeve by an anonymous user that used a vocal filter for the rapper Drake, and was actually able to successfully circulate for a few days before Universal Music Group had it taken down. And the only reason Universal Music Group was able to take the track down was because there was a little audio snippet at the beginning that took from a producer. There's like a producer tag that wasn't supposed to be in the track. And so they were able to use this sort of like theft case, but the voice itself was not the reason why they were able to have the track taken down. So there's still not really a legal precedent for what to do when there's a vocal filter. So this is an example of a YouTuber showing how to use an AI vocal filter to mimic or pretend to be the rapper Drake.
Drake songs, you want it to be like you're getting a lot of noise coming through this, like the top of your mouth. His voice is very nasally. I am Drake. You'll hear it like, I came in with my ex like Selena to flex, bumping Justin Bieber, but a fever ain't left, she know what she need, she bless, anyway. So we're going to be uploading those vocals to an AI generator, which will convert the timbre of my voice into the likes of Drake. Once again, I definitely don't condone using this service. This is merely an educational video, and I don't want to promote this at all to anyone who doesn't want to get sued. So I uploaded my vocals, ran it through the program, downloaded it, and that's going to sound like this. I came in with my ex
like Selena to flex, bumping Justin Bieber, but a fever ain't left, she know what she need, I need.
Now, it's not done yet. A couple of things you want to do. First off is add a de-esser. I'm just going to be using Ozone.
So you can hear from that example that through relatively simple means, he was able to step into the personhood of Drake. There's so many kind of issues that emerge from that at the intersections of sort of gender, race, right? But then also the sort of labor conversation that we're undertaking today, which is just like, what is the work of an artist in this environment? So I'll leave it there. I know we have a number of questions and conversations to delve into, but I wanted to give the context for what are some of the things that have flagged my attention in this discourse, and what's guiding my sense of what we need to regulate immediately.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Enongo. That's amazing as well. Great examples and very concrete, material, so we can discuss more ideas that come up from those. So I would like to start with some questions that are related to what you guys discussed, but are also general in terms of talking about and thinking about labor in a more general way, but also connected to the creative class as well. So the first one would be, what are the main concerns you have with the implementation of AI models and their impact on our labor? But that question, I would like to point out to rights, labor related to rights, culture, obligations, etc. So.
Yeah, I'll kick that off just because that's one of the things we talked a lot about in the writers group. I mean, as Enongo showed, one of the things that AI does is it kind of reanimates what we called fossilized labor. It takes people's work and it uses, language models, voice synthesis. It kind of, brings to life stuff that used to be someone's work and is someone's work. So I think there's a sense where you kind of have to fight for your stake, for what you did, for your sense of voice and likeness rights. And that's something that's not really codified in law, because I don't think law was ever really designed for this stuff. So there's been a lot of work recently amongst creative communities to get a right to likeness, a right to voice. Certain states have limited applicability of that. New York and California, obviously the entertainment industry is very based here, but Tennessee, for example. So that's something that's been an ongoing concern. But I also think, just in general, there's this thing called the moral right, that other creators in other countries have. When you're making adaptations of European movies, especially in France, writers have moral rights. It's the sense of like, how is our work being used? Do we have a say in it? And is it something that can be monetized and profited off of without our consent? To what degree does someone's style belong to them? I think we probably need clarification, which will happen through lawsuits, but maybe through legislation and activism, of the sense to which someone's style and their voice belongs to them. It's not something that can be freely traded without their consent. We as writers feel that. Now, that said, this should not be a replacement for us. If someone wants to use it to implement, to help their personal workflow, if they have underlying rights, great, that's wonderful. But it is, you also have to understand the limits of these systems, which is that they basically, especially the LLMs, they average a lot of stuff. So, as Enongo was saying, like when I saw, it represent, those first initial examples of it mimicking my style, it felt like a blurry version of me, and it felt very uncritical. There's not judgment in these systems. I think it's important to understand the technology behind them, and that they are, in a way, math. They're a form of compression technology. And so as a result, they do draw towards that average, and they don't necessarily use discrimination and thought and point of view, which, from my perspective as an artist, as much as a TV writer, as an artist, we kind of are. There's a lot of pushback. It's important to remember that. And I don't think the industry that has created this stuff has been very mindful or thoughtful of it. So it's up to us to remember that anytime you're using an AI product, you need to be bringing that judgment. And frankly, that judgment is probably the most important thing. I don't think we've really cracked that. And it's a question of like, how do we crack that? Why do we want to crack that? Like, why do you want to write? Like, what is writing about for me as a writer? It's like you're communicating your point of view to another person. So I think we should always keep that in the back of our mind.
Yeah, I absolutely 100% echo. I think I'm going to be echoing everything John says. But I wanted to add to that what I have been most kind of concerned with as I'm diving into these discourses is the conversation about the cultural imaginary around labor. Like, how do lay people think of or imagine what the work of being a musician or a writer or a dancer is? And in many ways, the momentum around how we push these labor discourses is contingent, I think, on how the broader cultural relationship exists with what we do. Like, there are all of these sort of like labor explosions across the country, and I think musicians are having a hard time tapping into that, because in part, where our work is still very much not viewed as work. Like, there are folks who have no idea like what it means on a day-to-day basis to be a musician. Like, if you ask and I've had this challenge actually with other creative friends of mine, where we don't know how the other person makes a living. Like, if I have a friend who works in theater and performance, I don't know how she's actually, the economics of being a sort of theater performer, or being a musician, or being, my husband is a fiction writer. So I have a sense of that because it's part of our livelihood. But were I not to be sort of intimately connected with someone in this world, I don't think I would know, and therefore appreciate, I think, the work that goes into sustaining and building a life as an artist. So there's I think a cultural belief still that's really, really resistant to change, that being a working artist is an incredibly self-indulgent career choice, right? That there's, even though the art lubricates every single aspect of our lives and shapes our sort of like political imaginary and does all of this important affective work, I think there's still very much a way in which most people are disconnected with the work of what it means to be an artist. And from my perspective, that has to be at the forefront of the conversation. And unfortunately, I think that falls on the shoulders of the artists, as us artists, to change, to like try to change some of that discourse, because our livelihood is so much, I think, caught up in sort of swells of how the cultural imaginary sort of vies for who's doing work and who's not. Like, we're reliant on other people. It can't just be us artists, I think. And I would be curious to hear from John, just in terms of your experience organizing, whether you felt like this moment has enabled other people to recognize writers as workers, as AI threatens to
Oh my God, yes.
destabilize other careers. Are people suddenly recognizing, like, oh shit, this could happen to me, maybe I should
Oh,
have an investment in this other.
absolutely. I'll tell you like one story from the strike lines. Like, first off, as writers, we're always sensitive to the fact that people like, we're lucky. Everyone wants to make movies and tell stories, and we do get paid to do it. It's an incredibly fortunate profession. It's really hard to get into. The entry level, breaking in is close to impossible. And actually, one of my biggest concerns about AI is how it affects young up and coming artists, and how it might make an insurmountable barrier to entry for like unheard voices. But when we call the strike, we're always afraid of like, oh, the general public is going to view us as like lazy, overpaid screenwriters who just sit around and type, and who cares? That was not what happened in the strike. There was something about this moment that really resonated. I would, if I wore my Writers Guild t-shirt over the summer, I had like people at like the market, like I had like a butcher like say to me, like, man, what's going on? They're trying to place you with robots. That's fucked up. Like, keep fighting. I was like, dude, I even had one day I was outside Universal, and we were walking our picket lines. And I remember this security guard paid for by Universal looks at me and he goes, "That's messed up, man. That's messed up. Keep walking." And I'm like, here's this guy who's, probably off-duty cop, like the opposite of what a TV writer is. But he's like, I get it. There's something like manifestly unfair with the way the AI discourse was rolled out, specifically by these very large tech companies that think in a kind of libertarian, labor-saving point of view. As a matter of fact, we were talking about this before the Zoom started. Like, I don't know if people have seen Jon Stewart's Daily Show from last night about AI. He literally plays like a clip from like an AI guy talking about how like, oh, this allows you to like do stuff without the tax of human beings. And Jon Stewart was like, the tax of human beings? Oh, do you mean employees? And I think that's very telling, because there is a little bit of an attitude of Silicon Valley that like humans are annoying and uncomfortable to deal with, and we're different. We disagree, we need rest, we want to be with our families, we have our points of view and our attitudes, especially in creative industries. That's like a big thing. But I also argue, as much bad stuff as Hollywood makes, every once in a while we make something amazing, and it's really hard to make anything either bad or great. But like, when stuff works, I think it is because of different points of view coming together in a collaborative conversational medium, and there is friction and it can be hard. But every once in a while you get something like, I don't know, hopefully you liked it. If you didn't, that's fine. Oppenheimer, that comes from that point of view. Or even the new Dune movie, more sci-fi. I'm a sci-fi guy, so I think in terms of those things. But like, that need of humanity in any process, all this stuff should be a tool. Like, that was something that we felt when we started the AI conversation and when we started the labor movement. That was not the rhetoric that we were getting from our interactions with studios and some of these companies. And I'm noticing them shift course. But we always have to be aware of that. And frankly, thank God for the writer's strike happening when it did, because I do think for the first time we felt like, oh yeah, everyone gets it. It's like there's something personal about work, about your work, that you feel like you have a sense of ownership over yourself. And AI really does kind of challenge that, and how we use it needs to be mediated and thought about and discussed.
Yeah, just very briefly, but I know before we jump into the next question, I remember starting to read more about this anxiety building around like computer science majors for the first time and conceivably in this historical moment where it was like they're reckoning with, I think, what folks in the humanities have been trying to reconcile and engage with these kinds of questions about where will I end up, because of the way that these systems threaten to take over code, or that there's a way in which finally there's a kind of empathy or engagement or understanding from folks who would regularly say, oh, well, you got an English degree, so you deserve to not be able to have a life of dignity, or be able to build any type of sustainable career. And now there's a recognition that like maybe we should have some systems in place, a safety net for everyone, so that they can have fulfilling lives.
Yeah, no, and I would like to echo that by commenting that this conversation has actually made us realize how important and fundamental questions are there, and continue to be there. Basically, what does it mean to be human, right? What is human from the cultural production that we send to the world, right? And that it could not be replaced by, or shouldn't be replaced, or why it shouldn't be replaced, right? But also fundamental questions about values such as labor and what is labor, for instance. And that has to do with the following question that I have for you, which is so the concept of labor has social and cultural weight, right? So for instance, the Anglo-Saxon culture or Nordic cultures, they have an idea of labor that is tied to a sort of identity of fulfillment of the self, right? So you live to work, kind of. But in other cultures, let's say the Hispanic culture in Spain and in the Iberic Peninsula and in Latin America, some other parts of the world, the idea of labor is subsumed to the idea of leisure, right? So you work to live, actually, to live. So it's sort of changing the perspective, right? So in AI and automated systems bring the promise of freeing people's time to enjoy their life, right? So we're not gonna have to get up every day at 8 to go and do the repetitive work that we need to do to get the money for the livelihood of everyone. But what cultural implications does this idea have for the labor culture of locations such as the US, for instance? That would be the question, right? So.
Well, I'd like to echo a kind of term that John used earlier, labor saving, to think through what this might look like in the US, with the caveat that I imagine that this is in some ways also a generational question. Like it strikes me that Gen Z and potentially Gen Alpha, and I think millennials are wrestling with this in different ways than folks in other generations. And especially, I think, I'm interfacing with my students, the ways in which they have set up boundaries around what they sort of will and won't accept, for better, for worse, within a work context, I think is something that might shift what has long been, I think, a US, a really sort of unbalanced relationship to work in the US as being reflective of our core as people, that our work is reflected, who we are is what we do. And I think that has long been felt, a sentiment that I've felt has been part of the US cultural ethos. But in terms of labor saving, we have all these tools that have developed that are supposed to cut down on the time that we work, and instead they just extend the workday. Like, email, it's like, I dream of a life without email. I dream of a life where no one could reach me. Like, you just couldn't reach me, or you have to get me on the phone. And so this thing that was supposed to make things more efficient or give us more time, ostensibly, has just made it bleed into other categories. So because the sort of culture in the US is focused on this sort of like exploitative relationship with work, I imagine that it just means, okay, well, then we expect even more from you. If you can put this part of your workday into ChatGPT, then there are other expectations in addition to whatever your tasks might be for that day or the thing that you're working on that are now sort of placed on you as a burden. I don't imagine that the exploitative relationship that many workers feel would be resolved by this, because it's a cultural issue. It's not something that the tools can fix or change.
Certainly not with the ethos of Silicon Valley, which is rolling out the deployment of these tools. Like, I just want to echo that 1000%, because, and again, I've had a lot of experience talking to people in AI, and I listen, I love some of them. I love math. I love science. I think math and science is great, but there is this exploitative work attitude that in Silicon Valley kind of works because you get an ownership stake in these businesses. So they work really hard and then they're going to get their billions. Now, it doesn't apply to them. It doesn't apply to every employee, and it certainly doesn't apply to all employees in the rest of the country. But the attitude they bring to it is, oh, this makes me 100 times more productive. So it doesn't really, yeah, I'm skeptical that this is going to end up being a labor-saving device, other than it will reduce the number of jobs. I do feel like two things will happen. One, more will be expected, and it will, that will, if anything, it might make it a little bit more frantic, because again, it's being deployed by a place whose attitude is 70-hour, 100-hour work weeks, work yourself till you break, hackathons all night, don't take care of yourself, don't get enough sleep, because at the end of the day, they have this pot of gold at the rainbow of like, I'm going to be a owner of $1 billion company. And that pot of gold does not go to everyone. So I think that's a very unhealthy attitude. The second thing I think, and I think we're seeing this in reality, is what happens when you employ AI in a real world context is it generates more work that is AI tailored, quote, prompt engineering. I actually talked to a friend who was at one of the big AI labs, and he said he started instituting a no AI text policy with coworkers, because what would happen is people would like say a couple of things, not really think about what they were trying to do, and then generate like a 2-page email from Claude or ChatGPT. And then he'd be like, I've got a 50-page email that I got it. Now I'm going to put it back into Claude, and Claude's going to summarize the email. I even saw like someone on Twitter posted this as a meme, and he's like, so you kind of see in a weird way, the AI is generating more work that's not necessarily fun, productive, or useful work. I saw another graph once on Twitter where someone pointed out that like once the Xerox machine was invented, like the length of US legal code just shot through the roof, because you could like just barf more text. And I think the real danger of AI is, much like a car allows us to drive vast distances and is incredibly useful, it forced a recreation of our cities. I live in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles is evidence prima facie of what happens when you take a city that had an incredible public transportation system and was growing at the exact moment that cars were unrolled, and suddenly reconfigured itself around freeways and roadways. It destroyed neighborhoods. It really changed the character of the city. And then there was a huge pollution problem that we had to deal with. So I'm like, I just worry that the way that technology gets unveiled will be thoughtless, and we won't be aware of all the negative externalities until it's too late. And I think part of these conversations is about really thinking through what and why we're trying to do with AI. So it would be wonderful if we could all have 4-day work weeks and work, 6 hours a day, and then do the stuff that is important and be with our families. I think America needs that more than ever. I think America should learn that from Spain. But my fear is that what will happen is instead more busy work will be created and then exported to other countries that feel like they have to keep up with AI. So that's a concern I have.
Great. So we still have plenty of questions, but I would like to open the floor for the audience. If you guys have any questions that you would like to ask, you can either put it on the chat or unmute yourself and ask the question. Yeah. If we can definitely continue with the conversation. And if somebody has a question that is a burning question, we'll be happy to have the discussion with you. So
I have a question.
That's it. Yeah,
Oh.
yeah. Go ahead, Katina. Yeah.
I'm just thinking, I mean, I know a lot of folks on the call probably teach in some capacity or another, and I know that AI in the context of classrooms has come up so much. And I'm curious, I don't know if either of you are actively teaching in classroom spaces right now, but what do you think about in the context of, not like AI policies in the classroom, but teaching critical literacy around AI technologies and helping students in particular learn to navigate what's coming at them all the time. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, as a writer, obviously, I love writing. I love learning. This kind of ties into kind of a more workplace rather than teaching thing, but I think there's a similar underlying issue, which is to be a professional writer for Hollywood, and I used to do journalism, like I had to write a bunch. I had to learn how to do it. And I just hope in the teaching, however AI is integrated into teaching, you don't deprive students of that like lesson. Like my concern is that a lot of the entry-level jobs where you learn really what your craft is and what you're doing and why you're thinking and where that critical learning comes in, like I'm afraid those jobs are going away because they're being replaced by kind of like AI stuff. And I think that would be horrible. So I think the burden is even more on the classroom to make sure that those skills land. Now, obviously, people are going to be using AI because it just is. It's like a thing like a web browser. It's just going to be here. Like there's no going back. The computation is there. But I think that teachers really need to educate themselves on how it works, the details of its mathematical functioning. I know math can be scary for some of us in the humanities. The math behind these things is not that scary. I actually find it's interesting. I love math. But that will allow you to see how it's being used by your students and then use it in a thoughtful, intelligent way. And one anecdote I saw was one teacher, rather than, knowing that he would be assigning essay prompts to students who would just, bring back ChatGPT generate essays, explicitly told them, here's a prompt. I want you to generate the essay. And now I want you to proof and correct it. Now I want you to read it. I want you to tell me what facts were made up, what is true. And I thought that's a smart way of doing it because you're at least teaching those critical faculties. But again, man, I really think there's something about language and thought that is important in the act of doing it. And my biggest pet peeve with the AI scientists I would talk to is they would tell me we've solved the blank page problem. And the thing I would say over and over again as a writer during the strike and still now is like, for me, yes, the blank page is hard, but it's not the problem. It's the necessary act of what I'm doing. If I don't face that, I'm not thinking. So you can use AI I'm sure there are many ways to use it. And every once in a while, I haven't quite found them for me yet, but I believe that it can be useful, but you should always view that blank page and that opportunity to think and use your brain. Like you just have to do that.
Yeah, plus one, echoing all of the thoughts. I would say in the context of the work that I've done, so I teach rap songwriting class, and I also teach a feminist sound studies course. And so with the feminist sound studies course, we do a lot of podcasting and storytelling. And so that has been I think a useful way to engage different faculties or different ways, modes of expressing one's knowledge, like knowing that if I ask for a paper, there is high likelihood that students will be able to kind of like use this set of tools. I think trying to engage different modalities, like different ways that folks share their knowledge, has been a really interesting insight into like, okay, well, this is a way for folks to feel included in a classroom context that maybe wouldn't necessarily have made them feel like the way that they know or the way that they show what they know is reflected. So why not just go to the easy thing that's going to allow me to just turn in this, this thing. The other thing that I've done is to have assignments that are really process focused. I think that, like John is saying, so much of the work, actually, I just attended a talk yesterday about composition and mental health, and the ways in which so many composers deal with this crisis of the blank page, right? In part because there's no space to discuss process and the ways that we think of how we arrive at the right sound or the right chord or the right thing, right? It's just sort of assumes that everyone knows how to get from point A to point Z in a healthy way. And so, like, many of us, even as adults, have really unhealthy relationships with writing, have really unhealthy relationships with our sense of self-worth, and there's a lot on the line, and it you know, maybe we've developed capacities to build our resilience over time, but you know, sitting with the reality that writing is hard, I think. And when I entered into college, I didn't know that, and so I felt like I should just know how to do this stuff. And the classes that I took and the professors that I worked with, it wasn't clear to me that, like, I should be struggling over my ideas, or like that's like part of the process. And so I think for a lot of students who have come up in an educational system where it's like, get the right answer and keep it moving, of course, when they show up and there's this shiny tool that's like, here's a right answer, they're going to lean into that because they've not had spaces where process is prioritized over product. So trying to figure out ways to assess, and assess maybe isn't even the right word, but to like open up process, or to open up your own process, to talk about your struggles with writing. One of the things I heard yesterday was like talking about workspace, like what actually is a workspace that's healthy for us. Is maybe it's sitting in front of a window when you start to write. Maybe it's like figuring out those somatic parts of what makes writing joyful, that often get overlooked because it's sort of like, well, we need to focus on craft. And it's like, well, part of the craft is like, am I okay? So I think, yeah, leaning into those things is maybe one way to bypass the desire to do something that's quick and easy.
Yeah, process. In Hollywood, we talk about trusting the process. I mean, I cannot echo that a million times over. It's like the process is the thing. And also like finding your voice. You know, I think the way writing has taught, there's often this pressure to quote, do it right, as opposed to find your voice. And like, that's something that for me creatively in this profession, that was really helpful. And that's what we were valued for. That's what we are valued for in this industry. That's how we build our value. That's how we get, you know, paychecks that get better and better for some of us, not all of us, is once you find that voice. And that's why I think that part, like protection of voice and style and likeness, is so crucial legally. I think that's something that everyone needs to be engaging with on a political, on a working group level, when you're dealing with employers. Like, we work hard to develop our voice because our voice is our view on the world and knowing what we want to say. And that is like how we add new stuff. Because the thing to remember about the current AI models is they do not generate the new. They literally take everything that exists and they interpolate. They create a gigantic matrix of all forms of expression, visual, audio, linguistic. And when you throw your prompt in, what they're doing is they're searching that matrix and they're joining up things. They're literally fitting a curve, if you know anything about math. But what you have to do as an artist is expand that matrix, expand what is out there to fit the curve. You're not interpolating, you're extrapolating. You're going to new spaces, you're imagining new things. And often that comes down to like your lived and embodied experience in the world. And I think that's something that we really need to protect legally, because that's kind of like what makes our country very productive, and B, makes art interesting. And it's part of us it's how we produce culture, which is important. Like there's a group intelligence embodied in culture that you can't just kind of rely on fossilized fuels, so to speak. Like, I do think of LLMs as a form of fossilized fuel of labor. And yes, like let's be honest, fossilized fuels allow you to go 70 miles an hour down a superhighway. But you need more than that. And there's a lot more to think about.
Great. Yeah, those are amazing thoughts. Any other questions? Any other questions that we would like to ask our guests? Okay, so we only have 1 minute to go, actually. Now I think this been a very productive conversation, and you know, this is a topic that as we were discussing with John and Enongo before the panel, it's you know, sometimes one doesn't know if this is timely or not, because the technology is evolving so rapidly, right? That is sometimes one feels like I'm late to the conversation, but sometimes it's not the reality, right? Because the conversation actually goes back to these fundamental questions that we have been discussing here as well. And also, if we're working in academia, for instance, the question about literacy, right, is not only teaching students how to use X, Y, or Z tools, but actually how the process works, right? Which is the big discussion and the big kind of takeaway that I see from this conversation as well. It's the possibility of thinking beyond the having the right question, the right answer for any questions. So I really appreciate your thoughts and your you know, your ideas, and this conversation, I believe, is to be continued, right? So
Can I want to say one thing before we go. I forgot.
yeah,
I want to mention this.
yeah,
I think it's
yeah.
also on us in the humanities to reach out to our like people who are more technically minded. I think the biggest thing that we can do is educate ourselves about how AI is generated. So it's not a magical, mystical word that is scary. And this is something that I would talk to writers on the line with, is like, we're a lot of TV writers. So often sometimes we're afraid of science and math unless you're a sci-fi writer. But like, I have profound respect for the AI scientists and what they've done, computer scientists, math majors. Like, there's a lot of creative, thoughtful people in this space. The problem becomes when we don't think about what they're doing and how they do it, because then we misapply the tools they've created. And they also, I've noticed, I would have conversations with like physicists and mathematicians, and like, they don't have an understanding of our creative processes. And I think that's something that, you know, you together can figure out how to apply the tool in a healthy, beneficial way for society. So I think it is also incumbent on us to educate ourselves. And I know it can be scary. I promise you it's not that scary. I mean, hopefully there are more AI scientists who will come and interact with the humanities. And that way, that conversation, you bring that collaborative spirit from the creative humanistic perspective into that industry. And I think it makes us all better. So I hope that we do that, because I do think if we don't, then the worst fears, I think someone said hellscape in the comments, the worst fears of a hellscape can come true if we're not thoughtful and vocal and collaborative and integrative. Sorry, just had to get on that soapbox. And then please, Enongo, if you have a soapbox, I hope you take it too.
No,
I think that
that's
was a
great.
great soapbox.
Enongo, any last words before we go?
Just I again +1 to what John has said, and also that we imagine that a lot of these conversations about AI and the sort of like future of work are really conversations that many folks in organizing spaces have been discussing in terms of quality of life, even beyond these sort of what feel like more recent conversations. So we wouldn't have as many anxieties, I think, about these tools replacing our work if every person could live with dignity, because there's a living wage, because there is universal health care, because there is not a system that prioritizes bombs over books. And so part of what this conversation has led me to understand is that every part of our organizing work is important. If you're organizing around food justice, that is still a part of this discourse. If you're organizing around education, that still ties into this, because these systems are interconnected. So I think that's an important thing to think about. Even if you feel technically illiterate or overwhelmed by the scope of these issues, there is a way to organize or support in your universe that will ultimately, I think, help to push the tide in the right direction.
Great. Okay. Well, this is a wrap. I appreciate your thoughts. I appreciate your generosity for coming to this panel, and I appreciate our audience time. I hope this panel was what you were expecting to have, and hopefully we can continue the conversation. John and Enongo will be more than happy to connect and yeah. So thank you for attending this panel, and hope to see you guys in the next one.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Bye, everyone.